The computer. It's everywhere we go. It's all around us. It's in our businesses. It's in our schools. It's in our homes. It's in our car. It's in the telephone in our purse or pocket. And it's in the games we play. It's a piece of it is equipment that is permeated every phase of our lives. And this little series of lectures, we're going to discuss one view of the evolution of the computer. Who came up with the first idea that a machine could do these things, and we're going to study and examine its different shapes and forms over the years. So part one, lecture one, part one, the evolution of the computer. It's a machine that calculates. If you think about it, why don't we call them computers? I mean, after all, they do so much more than mathematical calculations. They play music. They play games. They draw pictures. They just do all sorts of things. Much more than just compute. Maybe we should come up with another name for it, for this super tool that we know of as the computer. Who came up with this idea that a machine could do the kind of things that these machines do today? Well, the first guy that came up with it was a gentleman named Charles Babbage in the middle of the 19th century. Mr. Babbage was a mathematician, and at that period of time in our history was referred to as the Industrial Revolution. There was a tremendous amount of industry taking place, new inventions all the time. People were sailing the globe from one end of the globe to the other, building bridges, building buildings, building all sorts of construction. And in order to do all these types of constructions, you had to be able to calculate. You had to be able to compute. In fact, a person who did calculations at that time was referred to as a computer, a person, not a machine. Problem was that in those days, the computer, the human variety, had very few tools to work with. There was the slide rule, and there were tables, such as logarithms and anti-logarithms, that they could use for doing these calculations. And unfortunately, they weren't the most reliable tools in the world. In fact, Mr. Babbage became very disappointed or upset with all the errors that took place because the tables that they were using to do the calculations were in fact created by human computers who could make mistakes. And Mr. Babbage thought, well, why can't we get a machine that does mathematical calculations for us? Because really all mathematics is the application of rules. And so if you can have a machine that follows mathematical rules, it stood to reason to Mr. Babbage that it could do calculations for us. And so he got a grant, and he started developing his idea of making a machine do calculations. And what you see in this picture right here is the first machine ever to do calculations. It was called the difference engine. And the difference engine was a mechanical device, not electronic like the ones we use today, but a mechanical device, and it used the rule of differences to do calculations. And it was working. This is a working model that you see right now in this picture. But Mr. Babbage came up with another idea. And that other idea was a new invention that he started working on called the analytical engine. And the analytical engine represented a number of innovative concepts that are still in use today in computers over almost 200 years ago. The difference engine, for example, used a stored program. In other words, the machine, the physical machine, was a separate from the what it did. In other words, he was building a machine that could do different tasks based upon instructions that you put into it. It was a general purpose machine. First ever concept of separating the programming from the machine. Mr. Babbage came up with that idea. He came up with another idea. He borrowed from this gentleman right here, Mr. Jacquard, who was a weaver. Mr. Jacquard used punch cards to control the loom in order to create the designs that he used in his material. And Mr. Babbage borrowed that idea from Mr. Jacquard and came up with the idea of using punch cards in order to encode those stored programs that made his analytical engine function. So you have two concepts here, the punch cards and the stored programs that were, in the case of stored programs, still in use today, but the punch card was still in use as late as the late 1960s and early 1970s, using punch cards to control computers. Mr. Babbage was working on this analytical engine, and in the process met this lady right here. Isn't she lovely? Wouldn't you like to see some of the girls come to class dressed like that? You'd have to believe that they weren't in South Alabama in August. But this is Ada, Countess of Lovelace, and she was the daughter of Lord Byron, the poet. Lord Byron's daughter. And Ada, the Countess of Lovelace, and Charles Babbage struck up a friendship, and they talked a lot, and she became fascinated with his ideas of his analytical engine. Over here on the left, you actually see a working analytical engine that was built in 1910. Charles Babbage never saw one working. He just had the plans for it, and they used his plans to build this one. But anyway, Ada, Countess of Lovelace, and Charles Babbage struck up a relationship, and they wrote each other frequently. And in the notes, in the letters that Ada wrote to him, were some detailed instructions or programs to make the analytical engine work. Ada, Countess of Lovelace, in other words, was the world's first programmer. And there you have the very beginnings, the seed, so to speak, of the computer. Almost 200 years ago, by a mathematician named Charles Babbage, along with ideas from a weaver named Jacquard, and program codes from a lady named Ada, Countess of Lovelace. Those were the original pioneers of what we call a computer today. The sad thing is, not much happened after that for almost 100 years. Mr. Babbage's ideas came to an end. The government did not see the benefits of the analytical engine, so he lost his contracts and it was never built, and he was a very disappointed guy when he passed away. And nobody picked up that banner and took it forward for almost 100 years, and we will cover that era in the next part of our discussion.